Welcome to the Underwater Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of underwater portrait photography, cinematography, and everything in between, with your host, Brett Stanley. Welcome back to the Underwater Podcast, and this week I'm talking to John Ellerbrock, owner and CEO of Gates Underwater Housings. Gates have been a staple in the world of underwater imaging since the late 60s, when Elwyn Gates started building the first product in his garage and created a thriving business. John talks about the history of Gates, how he got involved, and what it takes to build camera housings for some of the world's best cameras. We discuss the manufacturing process, where Gates housings are being used, and where he sees the industry going in the future. All right, let's dive in. John, welcome to the Underwater Podcast.
Well, thank you for the invite, Brett. It's a pleasure.
Gates has been such a big part of the underwater world for me, just getting into it in the last sort of 10 years. I know that Gates goes way past that. How did it kind of start? Sort of talk us through this sort of little history of Gates and kind of where you sort of step into it.
Yeah, well, the company was founded by Elwyn Gates in 1969. And he, at the time, was laying linoleum floors, and he was an avid diver at the diving locker down at Pacific Beach. And he saw an opportunity to make his first product in his garage, which you might remember the Nikonos camera system had these really unique macro framers where you would put this extension between the camera and the lens and then have a framer out in front of it, such that when you would put any subject within that wire frame, you could trip the shutter and it was in focus and it was perfect. And as you can imagine, I mean, he knew about the idea from other photography, but he had to work out the details all by trial and error, how long to make the extension, what worked, what didn't, and then dialed it all in and offered a set of these macro framers for the Nikonos system. And that's where it all started. Over the decades that followed, he sold tens of thousands of them to underwater photographers. It was very popular, and that's what got him started in the whole underwater thing. So it didn't take long after that he moved out of his garage into a small suite, actually a part of a suite in Pacific Beach, where he could continue making these underwater products. That's where he got into doing underwater housings, photographic things. One of the things that he sold a mountain of our cables that allowed an extension between the Nikonos camera and whatever strobe you were using. So he would manufacture the entire cable and the fitting to connect to the camera and the fitting to connect to the strobe. Right. So he made a bunch of these. They were coil type cables. So that was a staple product. And then the 70s, 80s, 90s, he would make custom housings for a variety of things. If you want to see what these look like, we've got a museum in the front of our building in the lobby area. It's really popular. There's a lot of history there, not only of Gates, but of underwater imaging in general. So a lot of what Elwyn created over those decades is in our museum now, from film cameras to the first video cameras. You might recall the very first video cameras where you had a camera head you could hold like you might hold a camcorder now, but the recording device was a giant VCR type deck that was strapped around a strap around your shoulder and carried at your belt side. So we've got a housing in the museum that has the camera on top and the recorder below it, and it's got a funny V shape to it for that he made completely by craftsmanship. He would hammer out aluminum and weld it together and cut big slabs of acrylic for the front and rear and do this technique called flame polishing it. It was when I say craftsmanship, it's a lost art for the things that he did in that time to make these housings. So he got into the housings, and then in the 1990s, things really started to take off because you remember the Sony Handycams, the little personal ones with the small tape drives in them?
Yeah. Were they high 8 or something?
Well, actually, High 8 came. Well, yeah, it was. Sorry, High 8 was originally the tape format, and then it moved to mini DV, became digital after that. But yes, through that period, these camcorders became wildly popular because they were small and you could record. Anybody could pick one up and record anything you wanted, like we use our iPhones today. That was sort of the iPhone of the time. So Elwyn decided to say, let's wrap a shell around it and take it underwater. And that took off. That was a big deal for Gates. And that was right about the time that I met Elwyn. In 1996, I was a local recreational diver and wanted to go shoot what we were seeing underwater so I could show my friends. Yeah. And so I met Elwyn then and knew that at the time I was working through various startups in the .com era. There were wireless and satellite TV, a number of different industries. And I knew that eventually I was going to be a business owner of myself. And so Elwyn decided in 1997 that they were going to sell the company. It took a few years to work things out until 2002 when my wife and I took over the keys. But it was in those interim years, I helped them do some marketing for the company and to move their products, which, worked against me for buying the company, of course. But it was a good way to find out what it was all about and if it was a good fit for a future business. And as it turned out, it was perfect.
That's amazing. And so when he was creating the sort of these handycam housings, was he mostly selling those to, sort of consumers like just divers, or was that more towards the commercial sort of world?
Exactly right. It was all recreational divers. Interestingly, if you look at the markets that Gates has served over the years, prior to that handycam era, Elwyn was making housings for television. He has an Emmy for a large housing he made for the Betacam. You might remember the giant shoulder-mounted Betacams, still in use today. Though you see them at the baseball and football games so same size, but it was standard definition at the time. And he made one for television, and I don't remember the name of the program for which he won the Emmy. I want to say it was National Geographic. Okay. But a giant yellow-colored housing that was sandcast is the method for making it. But he was making a lot of these professional-grade systems. And then comes along the Handycam, and Gates became recognized as a consumer product company then at the time as well. Yeah. So, and since, when Karen and I took over the company, we were still doing quite a number of camcorder housings. It was a bread and butter product line for us. But as you have seen yourself, those have disappeared from the marketplace. When digital photography caught up with the video side, that started taking over the whole camcorder market. And now, the vast majority of cameras that are out there on the market are photographic cameras first and that do video second. So that took over the market. And of course, the point and shoots came around, GoPros came around. So Gates evolved away from the consumer video market and back much more toward the professional end, which the housings you've used is what we're very much known for today.
And so I think, I guess around like 2002, 2003, 2004, that's pretty much like a revolution of digital imaging came through. Mm-hmm. So that must have been a very interesting time for you to sort of take the reins of the company. And did you feel like that influenced your direction in terms of what sort of products you were going to make housings for?
Oh, very much so. What you're referring to is what I call technology waves. So to lead into this, Howard Hall was shooting for many, many years on a 16 millimeter film camera. And when high definition was in its infancy, this would be the late 90s, he and Bob Cranston saw the writing on the wall and said, okay, there's a technology wave coming. So Howard sold off his 16 millimeter library and started rebuilding it in HD shortly after that. And it became clear to me that, this technology wave was what drives what Gates does in a sense, because we're always chasing the latest cameras. We're always chasing the latest this, but it's those technology waves that have a really big impact on what we do. So when high definition came along and really began its adoption into the general marketplace, that drove a big wave of growth for the company. So buying the company in 2002 was right on the leading edge of that wave. And it was quite, as you say, it was quite good for us to be at that particular moment of time.
Did it feel strange kind of letting go of the consumer market and moving more into the commercial, production world?
It did. It's hard to let go of something that's been so good to you, that has worked out so well. But, as a business owner, you have to look at it and say, where is this going? Can it keep making money, or are we going to start losing money? You got to be a little smarter than having sentimental attachments to it. And when you look at all the smaller cameras that were coming along, we just realized that the type of manufacturing that we do with machined aluminum, by this time, there's a whole side story I could give you about how we've manufactured over the years. But at this point in time, we were getting into CNC machining, and where historically the whole industry was doing sand casting, or they were doing extruded shells. Even Elwyn had a number of extruded tubes that were 10, 12 feet long that you would slice up and then turn into a housing. Right. So we began machining everything, because it's one of those things I could see into the future that said, everything is going this direction. There's so many benefits to machining and being able to turn on a dime. If we want to change something in a product design, we can do it overnight. Whereas if we were extruding something or we were sandcasting something, the process of that to make some change is weeks, if not months, to do it. So that became, in a big way, a competitive advantage for us, because we could turn quickly. We could take a new camera that's come on the market and create a housing for it in record time. And that was a big deal as well. So the machining part of it had a big influence on where we were going with what we were doing. So leaving behind the consumer market and saying everything we do lends itself well to the professional end, it was a natural for us to progress that direction.
Right. Yeah. You could see the benefits of sort of letting go of that market and moving into the more specialized market.
Exactly. We do still make one housing for the camcorder market. It's a Sony 4K small camcorder that isn't really used much for the consumer end anymore. It's been picked up by low-end TV productions, or people doing their own videos they post wherever. But they're looking for something a little more, straddles that recreational, professional market with a little bit. But there's still may be our best seller ever is that particular camcorder, because it's been on the market now for 5 years, that part is unprecedented. To see a camera, digital camera, be on the market for that long in the age we're in, it's just remarkable.
No, because technology moves so fast, and people are so fickle as well. They're wanting, the more megapixels, they're wanting the higher, frame rates and all the data sets and all that sort of stuff. What is it about that camcorder, do you think, that is so stable?
Well, two things. Number one, Sony sees it as it continues to sell for them. So why change it? It's got a foothold and people like it. But the other is it's a very capable camera. It's 4K, does high HDR. Since it has a built-in lens that's a huge zoom range that's completely usable underwater. You can be very opportunistic with it, from wide to macro and everything in between. And it handles underwater colors pretty darn well. So it's got a lot of things going for it technology-wise.
So that must be an interesting thing for you as well, like having not just the production side of stuff in terms of making your housings, but you must have to have your finger on the pulse of what cameras are going to be the next thing, what new technology is going to come in that you want to sort of back and invest in, right?
Absolutely. Back up 20 years again, and with Sony, the market was very different in that time, because Sony would come out with a small high definition camcorder, and their flagship model we knew was going to sell. We easily predicted that it was going to be popular. So putting our money into the R&D to develop a housing was a no-brainer. It was easy. And at that time, Amphibico and Light and Motion would do the same. Everybody could see the writing on the wall. These days is a different story, though, Brett. As you can see, there's a million cameras on the market.
Yeah.
And picking one that we can put our money into and get a return on investment is a lot harder. The crystal ball is a lot murkier when we're talking about today. So what does that mean? In a business sense, another big shift in our company has been away from these, I'll call them our standard product line, where we put our money into something and we know it's going to sell well enough to do that. We have shifted a lot more toward the custom side. So there's cameras out there that, look good, they look promising, but they just don't get over that threshold of saying, let's make a housing. So we put it into that column on the whiteboard that says it'll be a custom if somebody wants it. And not just that, but I mean, there's a lot of obscure cameras out there that people approach us to discuss taking them underwater. So we're doing a lot of more custom work than we ever have in our history, driven by technology, but also driven by our brand name is, I'm going to toot our own horn here. Our brand name is very strong for what we do. For Gates is synonymous with reliability. So we are known for when you come to us for custom work, you're going to get the Gates name on the side of it, which candidly comes with a price tag attached to it. And those people with the budget are not hesitant to do it because they're involved the entire way through the design process. And when we get it finished, it comes with the service and support, the Gates name on the side of it. And it's exactly what they wanted from the beginning. So that is a lot of our business model these days.
Well, let's kind of explore that. So what is entailed in getting a custom housing made? What steps do you need to go through in terms of someone's brought you this obscure camera, they want to have a housing for it. What do you need to do in terms of design and technology to make that work?
Good question. There are a number of steps in the process. The first one is try to suss out the budget the person has for what they're seeking. And 9 times out of 10, they've got, what's the phrase? They've got a champagne taste and a beer pocket.
Right.
So, so we right up front, we try to see if there's a match between the budget and the task.
Yeah.
So if the budget's there and the will is there, then the next step is we start just putting requirements to what they want. So we'll get on a video call, discuss their application, what they want to do, back and forth about what features are going to be important, what's not important. And we'll wrap a statement of work around it. So they know exactly what the product's going to be when it's done and what the price is to create it. And then they take that, digest it. If they come back and say, let's go, then there's some, legal documents. We have a development agreement that they'll sign. NDAs are almost always in place. And then we proceed. We start down the design path. We have them involved we have 3 steps. It's a preliminary design review, which can be generally broken into 1 or 2 of those to make sure we're going down the right path, this is how they want to, what our design approach is exactly what they want it to be.
Right.
So once we do that and they give their approval on the preliminary, that's the okay to then proceed into the next step, which is all the details. We have a critical design review with them, which is, continue down and finish all the final details, prepare it for production. And then we have the final design review, and that's the okay to proceed and to make the thing. So they're giving their blessing that, this is what I want, let's go. And then we go make it. And all the work, as you can probably imagine, all the cost of the development of a custom product goes into that R&D phase. The actual making of it is really just execution. I don't want to say it's a trivial amount, but it is a smaller part than the R&D process is. So then we make it, and I want to say it's as simple as make it and deliver it. It's not always that simple, but when we've planned well and developed it well and thought it through, set it up for success, then getting the manufacturing done and delivering it is a pretty straightforward process at that point.
Yeah. So, I mean, the actual design of the housing itself, do you have, I guess, you've been in business for so long, you must have some pretty, kind of good ideas of how things are going to work in terms of controls and how the camera is going to sit in there and volume to buoyancy sort of calculations. Is there much that's kind of a surprise to you guys now?
Well, some things come out of left field that are a surprise. I'll give you an example. Just last week, we got an inquiry from Europe for a laboratory application It's a camera that's used generally in forensics for criminals, crime scene forensics.
Yeah.
That they have a very particular application for in a lab environment. And the challenge there was not particularly the controls or fitting it into the housing. The challenge there was we had to find a material to go in front of the lens, and they have light emitters on them that emit in specific frequencies. So we had to find glass that would go in front of that and not block out any of the frequencies that they're using in this particular camera. Right. So, when those things come along, they're challenges, but that's what makes it fun. That's the really things you can sink your teeth into and develop something really fresh.
Oh, no, totally. I mean, that must be like talking about cameras and stuff, just, usual, video cameras or imaging. You're dealing with the set amount of the light spectrum, generally pretty much the same all the time. So when you get something like this, it must be a lot of fun and also frustrating to try and work out how to solve this problem.
But again, that's the fun part, overcoming those obstacles and, diving in, as it were, with jumping in with both feet and seeing it through and getting it done. And you're right. We deal with the visible spectrum in our everyday things for the professional, imaging crowd. But this one was unique. It was, it extended into the UV and infrared range. So we really had to take that into account.
Yeah. So if you're dealing with custom optical glass and all that sort of stuff, do you guys make your glass domes and ports in-house, or is that something that's outsourced?
That's outsourced. We try to do everything we can here in our own facility in Poway, California. For those people that aren't familiar with the area, we try to do everything here that we can, but there's a number of things we certainly can't. And glass is its own discipline. We don't even want to get close to that. So no, we outsource the glass manufacture. The anodized process for our housings, for the aluminum, that's an EPA nightmare that's best handled by the professionals as well. So there's certain things we don't do here, and rightly so. Because
it's an entire business on its own, I assume.
It is. It is. Yeah.
In terms of, because you said you went from, you started making them in plexiglass and then, sort of moved into using metal and all that sort of stuff. What are the kind of the differences between, say, making something out of plexiglass or making it out of metal? I assume there's specific reasons why you'd use one or the other.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've worked with a variety of different materials over the years. And even way back when Elwyn was doing his first housings in the 70s, he was working with aluminum in a different way. He would literally get sheets of aluminum and mill them, hammer them into shape, weld them. And then he could machine acrylic. Acrylic happens to be a very machinable material.
Right.
And it also has the advantage of being the same index of refraction as water. So when you take it in the water to acrylic interface basically disappears. So you've probably seen acrylic domes or anything acrylic that looks horribly scratched, and you'd never want to take that underwater. Well, as soon as you take it underwater, all those things disappear. It's kind of magic that way.
Yeah, it's amazing because I'm very rough with my housings. And I have acrylic domes pretty much for that reason.
Yes, exactly. Andy Casagrande does the same thing. He's constantly sticking his housing in the mouth of sharks. So he didn't want to have to replace a glass dome every time he does that. So he shoots on acrylic for that reason.
That's good. That's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've used a number of different materials. So there's acrylic, there's aluminum, there's acetal or Delrin, as some people know it, and stainless steel. We rarely machine stainless steel because it's just harder and it's more difficult. But sometimes we have to, depending on what we're doing. And so those are the basic materials that go into what we do. Although that'll lead me into something else that we're really it's going to use too many puns here. We're deep into we have been doing 3D printing now for, I think 6 years.
Yeah.
And I encourage you to come by. It's much more dramatic to see this in action, but we have a room that's now dedicated to, I think we have 4 or 5, maybe 6 printers in there running. And when we got our first one 6 years ago, to see what could this do for us, in the very first week, I had a a part that it was essentially a gear that would go on a lens to adapt it for use in the housing. And I gave it to one of my machinists to make it on the machine, make it in our factory. And it took him a full week to design it or to program it, cut it, and produce the finished part. Well, we took the same gear and put it onto our 3D printer. We had to tweak it slightly, but for printing, but we put it on the printer and came back the next day and it was done.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that immediately demonstrated the power of where this technology was going. And so we have, for prototyping now, we use them. For production parts, we use them. We've cut our teeth on what to do and what not to do. So we're pretty good at how to design things for printing so they're going to be reliable in the product. And we've now got the latest 3D printer has let me think here, it's a 24 by 24 inch bed that we're printing port caps on. And yeah, it might seem like not a good use for a 3D printer for a hard port cap. But the thing is that when we were machining these, the cost of the block of raw material to go and make this port cap was extraordinary. I'm talking, $75, $100 just for the raw piece of material to make a simple port cap. And so it took us a while to work out the details of how to print something that big, but we eventually got there, and we're printing them. Not only are they're superb for the application, but they can be printed in colors. We can make them custom now too. Commander Rentals in Atlanta, for example, is one of our top customers, and they have a number of these hard port caps now for their systems that say Commander right across the front of them. It's very impressive.
Oh, that's the thing I think with 3D printing. I've been doing a little bit of that myself just because I've had some things I need to make for my studio that are custom, and I can't buy them. So okay, well, let's try out 3D printing. So I've been doing a little bit of that, but the brilliance of it is, like you say, the lack of wasted material, and even the material that is kind of wasted can even be recycled back into the system to be used to print again.
Yeah, very true. The power of it is the lack of wasted material. Like in contrast to machining, of course, so much is cut away to make this final product. In our application, 90% of the aluminum that we get an aluminum block in, and we cut away 90% of it to make what is ultimately an underwater housing. Yeah. So in the 3D printing environment, exactly, all you're using is the amount of material you need to make that particular part, and that's it.
So that's a good question. So when you are milling stuff, and say it's a block of aluminum, what do you do with all the waste? Does it get sent back and put back into a new block, or what do you do with it?
We have a chip bin right outside our door that when it's full, it gets picked up by the recycling guys. Yeah. And they basically give us a bunch of beer money.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. It all gets recycled. It all goes back in. It might end up in your beer can. It might end up somewhere else. But no, the recycling industry for metals is very well developed. They take anything we produce for chips, metal chips, they will recycle. And I just gave them something I didn't know they recycled. A lot of our tooling is carbide material. And solid carbide, which is superb for machining aluminum. But, we break them, they chip, they can't be used anymore. So we just been tossing them into a bin. Well, it turns out they can recycle that too. And it's not just recycling, but it's worth quite a bit of money. I was shocked that how much it was worth. So yeah, one thing we do pretty well here in the United States is recycling things, across the board. Not as good as some other countries, but everything we produce as chips finds a new home when it's done.
Right. And it is when you said beer money, it did remind me, I did a season in Canada snowboarding, and we would go and buy a lot of beer from the grocery store, drink all that beer. And then when we took it back, we would keep all the cans, but if we took it back, we would get money for those cans, which we would then spend on beer. So there was this beautiful vicious circle of beer drinking and recycling.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I think that's the other thing too. With metal recycling, I think there is so much, money to be made in the recycling process. Collecting cans, recycling, copper, all that sort of stuff. There is such a good return of investment in terms of that recycling system.
Yes.
Whereas I find plastic, not so much. Like it seems to be very like reduced returns.
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that plastic recycling is a completely subsidized effort, whereas metals recycling is self-sustaining. It's the demand for the chips to be recycled is less than it is to mine it fresh for certain applications. So yeah, your point's well taken.
So, and to digress a little bit, I mean, I kind of find it interesting that I heard this statistic, I don't know, a few years ago of like 90% of all the aluminum that's been produced is still in circulation because of the recycling systems.
Could be. I wouldn't be surprised.
Which makes you wonder why people do tend to, make water bottles and all these things out of plastic when they could be quite easily made out of aluminum and recycled. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, more and more I see people with their water bottles, their aluminum or stainless things when they're working out or whatever. So I think the good news is we're shifting that direction. We just the incentives have to be changed a little bit more so that, the cost of buying it in plastic is higher than the cost of having your own reusable container.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it all comes down to incentives, doesn't it?
No, exactly. And I think this is a beautiful and unintentional segue of your housings being used to film ocean conservation shows and kind of documentaries that show the kind of the devastation that these plastics are actually making out there. Who is using your housings? What are they being used for?
Our legacy, if you will, is in the natural history market. Elwyn, as a diver, and the things he was making for many, many years, the housings were for National Geographic, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. You might recall that program.
Yeah.
PBS, and of course, over in the UK in Bristol, there was the BBC Natural History Unit that was using Gates equipment for a very, very long time to make their programs. Sir David and the whole crew there. So that's what Gates has been known for we're on 53 years now of being in business. So, that is the market, that is getting the word out to the world about, hey, we've got a problem here. We humans are making too much of an impact on this, this spaceship we call Earth, and we need to change it. And they're the ones leading the charge. So our part of it, as you say, is we make the equipment that they can document it, make the images, and show the rest of the world. Yeah. So in an indirect way, we are supporting that effort, and we're really happy. I mean, it's not the main reason that we do what we do. I mean, we've got a business and we've got to, continue to stay in business. But the next thing right behind that is we can help all these people go and change the world. And indeed, all these productions, I mean, countless names and companies that are indeed changing the world out there by that effort. And it's just great to be part of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so I've spoken to a lot of, wildlife underwater shooters, and I think quite a lot of them are using Gates, for their actual own rigs, especially the Deep Komodo, I think has got a great representation out there. Are you getting a lot of feedback from people using it? And does that kind of inform you to sort of make changes and sort of make things more usable or more functional?
Oh, all the time. We have a large part of our customer base are owner operators for sure. And if you want to point to one of our more recent successes is supporting the Komodo and soon the Komodo X. They're very popular cameras, and that has been popular in turn for us. But our coming from the background that I did, there's if you worked here, you would often hear the phrase, "It's our job to break it, not the customer." Right. So we try to put through everything through its rounds, test it, make sure that when it gets out to the field, it's going to be the reliable Gates product that people expect. But, things happen in the field. And when they do, we take those things very seriously. And we go through a process of, we want to find out what happened, what are the details of what happened, everything we can, and then try to get to the root cause of that problem. And very often the apparent cause is not what is the actual root cause of it. And so if that leads back to what we're doing here at Gates, then absolutely we will change our processes or the product design or something to make it better in the field. And there are, there's some examples of that I could share with you. Let me think here. There's one of the things we've struggled with is we've been with the RED system for a long time. And if you're familiar with the DSMC1 and DSMC2 platforms, the interface between the camera and the RED LCDs is an HDMI-like interface. It's proprietary to RED, but it's very similar to HDMI. Right. Well, HDMI is just a bag of hurt in many ways. There's 19 conductors in a full-on connection. There's 19 conductors, right. And it's high-speed data going over that line. So having a very reliable interface in a marine environment like we are has posed its challenges over the years. So the cable that we make, we were able to take the RED spec and make it marinized, if you will. So we make it with a really tough jacket on the outside. We do other things to it so that it'll stand up in the marine environment. And then, so we adapted to what we're doing. But even with all the measures we take, the beating that they get in the marine environment and is just so harsh on it. So there's we don't have the big margin between the design and what it's doing and the failure rate that's in the field. So we have candidly struggled with the failure rate out in the field for those cables. So to make the point, we have made design changes to that over the years, and another one fairly recently to try to make these even more reliable in the field. So we're on a constant process of improvement with that singular goal in mind of these things got to be reliable. They've got to work, because if somebody's down in the field and can't get the shot, then, they're screwed. And my name or the Gates name is on the side of it. And, we're culpable, if you will.
No, and that's the thing too, is that, it might not be your operator who's kind of pissed off. The production is going to see the equipment they used and then maybe say, let's not use that on the next production. Yeah, it can make things quite hard. Yeah.
And I think that effort, that mantra of reliability for us is one of the key reasons that we are now, as you've seen, we have been moving away. I shouldn't say moving away from. Our brand is spilling over into the cinema and TV world more and more these days. Yeah. It's a market that has been owned by Pete Romano and Hydroflex for decades. And it wasn't by any particular intent that we're finding our way into that market. It's just that what we do finds its word of mouth around to them. And we're making housings now for all the ARRI cameras. We've been doing RED cameras forever, but in more recent years now, we're finding that we're supporting the ARRI cameras and things like surface control of camera, lens, all the things that you need in the cinema world. So we've become somewhat experts now in surface control of everything going on underwater. So just because of that spillover into the market.
Yeah, and that's interesting as well, is having to kind of retool the way your housings work, because with the wildlife stuff, it is the operator who's down there doing everything, and they are untethered a lot of the time. They might be out there by themselves, actually just shooting days and days of footage. Whereas in the cinema world, you'll have focus puller on the surface, you want a surface feed, you have director on the surface, and all those controls. Yeah. Was that much of a shift for you, or did you kind of already have a lot of that in place?
Well, it's easier to make a housing with no controls on it. So to go that direction was not a big step. I mean, the know-how of sealing a housing for underwater use, that's completely transportable. But what we had to really get up the curve on was understanding all the protocols that are involved between, the lens control systems or interfaces from camera to whatever's going to control it. So is it going to be wireless? Is it going to be wired? What's the protocol involved? Is it Ethernet? Is it RS-232? What's happening here? So there's a lot of work to do to figure all that out. And as well, with the cables that we're using for surface control, they have to meet certain criteria to be robust and reliable. And, when you step on it on the deck, it's not going to break through the jacket, for example. Yeah. So there's a number of things that went into it. And we've been doing this now. Started oh gosh, maybe 10 years ago, maybe more than that, when we introduced the original Red 1 housing in 2008, we started down that path of having to learn more about how do we support these surface demands in that market. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because even with some of the wildlife stuff, they do want like surface control of stuff. Do you ever do anything where they're locking a camera off down on a tripod and then basically retreating?
Oh, yeah. Yes, exactly. The natural history crowd has moved in a remote application more and more. As you can imagine, they're always looking for the latest way to capture the images of whatever critter they're going after. And so if they can leave something down with the critter and disappears because the divers spook them, all the better. And there's a lot of that happening for sure.
Right. Yeah. What's the longest you've had a housing sit on the bottom of the ocean?
Oh, that has, the longest has been when people lose them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, intentionally.
Oh, well, it's, it can be days at a time, but that's about it. But no, we've gotten housings back that got lost and were down for months, maybe even extending into years. Oh, and they come back and they're perfectly fine. They're just, totally encrusted on the outside, but everything inside is perfectly fine.
I do remember there was a show, I think it was a Netflix show, came out a few years ago called Chasing Coral. And it was kind of a docuseries about the bleaching of the coral. Uh-huh. And I don't know if you've seen this, but they a lot of the show was concerned with them building a camera system that they could leave down there for months at a time to be able to sort of time-lapse document everything. And it was very interesting watching them go through different iterations of this housing, basically, with a dome that was self-cleaning and how that would work, whether it was like windscreen wipers or whether it would constantly rotate or any of that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Do you find that people are asking you for that sort of stuff?
No, we don't have anything that would to do. I remember that it was a wiper that would go across the dome to knock off whatever little critter decided they wanted to start attaching their barnacles or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
No, we haven't done anything quite like that. Our housings might go down for days at a time to document something, but that's about it. Nothing as long as what they were doing on that docuseries. Yeah,
I think it was like 6 months at a time, or maybe a year. It was interesting.
Yeah, that was a unique challenge too. It would have been fun to be part of it, but they found somebody to take care of them, and that was good.
Yeah, no, exactly. What do you guys do in terms of accessories and stuff? Are you delving into the lighting side of stuff as well?
We do occasionally, depending on market demand. I think it was in 2014, 2015. There was a clear opening for, as LEDs became more and more powerful and could be battery driven and produce enormous amounts of light. That's where the two things intersected. You could produce this enormous amount of light and make it battery driven. So, and the LED technology was just getting to that point. So we decided to make a set of lights. They're called the GT14s, and the 14 is for 14,000 lumens, which today doesn't sound like a lot, but at the time that was a huge amount of light to come out of a battery powered setup.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So we, decided this would be worthwhile, and we developed it, and we're still selling them. They don't sell quite the way they used to because other things have passed by. But we do that. And we did a custom project in, 2-3 years ago that is for, are you familiar with the Astera Titan tubes used in cinema?
Yeah. The sort of 4-8 foot long LED tubes.
Yeah. They've got a 2-foot Helios, a 4-foot Titan, and a 8-foot other name. Anyway, the 4-footer, we developed basically a clear polycarbonate tube to take that underwater with not only access to the touchscreen on the tube itself, but it can be tethered to the surface for full DMX control.
Oh, so, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we've got a number of those out in rental houses and doing their thing. So that's the extent of the lighting that we're doing right now. And so it's not our main thing to do. We did it. The GT14s we did because it was very opportune. We saw that this was something the market needed, and the Astera was a custom project that in this case we had free license to go sell it to other people. So that was nice.
Yeah.
And, that's about it for lighting.
So if you sort of come up with a project or someone comes to you and they're like, we just want to try this out, we don't want to invest a lot of money in it, where do you spend most of your money? Is it, I would say it's not so much in the manufacturing anymore because you've kind of dialed that in with the 3D printing and the prototyping. Is the R&D and the design of it sort of where you spend the most amount of your time, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. That's where I would say 80%, maybe 90% of the cost is in R&D, maybe more like 80%. And the reason is because what we do here, the knowledge base of what we do is so highly specialized that our rates for R&D are not insignificant. They're what you get for what we know and how to produce it is where you're making your investment. So that's where it goes in, is in the upfront part. And then, the manufacturing, as I mentioned earlier, all the planning, all the preparation, all that goes in at the beginning so that when we get to the manufacturer, it's really just execution to get it done.
Yeah, it's almost, kind of hitting play on that miller or that the printer, and then, everything. God willing, should all just fit together and do what it's told. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the time it does. Yeah.
Yeah. What is, I love this question of what is your worst failure? What is your best achievement and what is your worst failure?
You'll remember this, was it 2013 when Avatar first came out and the entire industry was talking about 3D.
Yeah.
3D was everything. I think, if you went to NAB that year, it was just the most amazing thing to see how many companies were announcing, we have something about 3D. We're going to do 3D. I remember a booth that the company, I think they made batteries, and they had nothing to do with anything really 3D, but they put a little sign up in their booth that said, we do 3D.
Oh, right.
It was a mania of 3D. And so frankly, I got swept up in this thinking, okay, there's if everybody's behind it, it's going to go somewhere. So we made a housing for a Panasonic 3D, basically a camcorder.
Right.
If you looked at it closely, what they did was take one of their camcorders and put a dual lens on the front of it. So much like you see Canon's got their dual fisheye lens out on the market now, very similar to that, but they had to switch lenses actively so that one frame would record left image, one frame would record the right image back and forth.
Right. Yeah.
So it was very light hungry and it had other limitations to it, but Panasonic put many of their eggs into the 3D basket. And so we made a housing for that. And I don't want to tell you how many we sold because it was a frighteningly few of them. Right. Because by the next year, the next NAB, nobody was talking about, barely anybody was talking about 3D anymore. It was just such a wild panacea that just fizzled as fast as it came. It was really remarkable to watch. So that was my lesson in, when these new things come along and everybody's in hysterics about it, to just take a step back and say, let's evaluate this a little closer.
Well, that's a good question. How long do you wait to see if something's going to be, and risk losing the advantage? How long do you sort of wait to sort of do that gamble?
I think a good measure of that, one of the best measures of that, is how many people are contacting us and saying, I want this.
Right.
And are willing to put some money where their words are.
And then, so which one of your biggest achievements?
I would have to say that establishing a relationship with Red Digital Cinema back in 2006 when they showed up at NAB, and I was actually speaking with a friend in the Canon booth, and he grabbed me. He said, "John, you gotta see this." So he walked me out of the Canon booth and he walked me over to the Red booth. And he walked up to Jim Gennard. Is that I'm pronouncing his name right? Yeah. And he said, Jim, I'd like you to meet John. She makes the best underwater housings in the world. And I barely got a word out of my mouth when Jim said, all right, we've got our underwater housing guy.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
So, and I'm just looking around at what is Red? What are you doing? And so that was the start of a really good long-term relationship with the company. Now, you've seen they've had their trials and tribulations over the years with so many different things, but we've been there with them all the way. And maybe I don't know if we're the only, but one of the few companies that were there at that time that are still doing what we're doing, because there's been a number that have come and gone. Mm-hmm. But the relationship with the people at Red is first rate. They're just great people, and we love them. And that's not to say that we don't. The relationship with other camera manufacturers is terrific too. They're all wonderful people and very supportive of what we do. But making a decision on a new digital cinema camera that was, it was not like 3D was, but everybody was looking at it, and there was a lot of buzz around it, a lot of things, people thinking, what's going to happen? Is digital cinema going to be a thing, or is everybody going to continue shooting on film? Where is it going to go? But, we took a chance and said, all right, let's go and see where this runs. And we did. And that was a good decision.
Yeah, no, that's paid off. Definitely.
Yeah.
What do you see happening in the future? Are there any technology you're excited about?
Oh, that's a really good question. These days, these technology waves of higher resolution, how many Ks can you have, has kind of plateaued. We're looking more at very specialized things that are in the market. So that camera I mentioned earlier that came out of the blue as a custom for forensics, I started thinking about, well, what could this be used for natural history stuff? And so there's these things. Oh, here's another one. These things that fall into the cracks that other people aren't doing.
Right. We
love the Laowa lenses. The shout out to all those people who and especially the designer who's doing this amazing stuff. Their lenses seem to fall in between the cracks of all the other manufacturers out there. And a couple of the things that they've done we really like are their probe lenses. Have you seen those?
Yeah. Like they're sort of a foot, 18 inches long, and a tiny little lens on the end, so you can sort of get into spaces you couldn't normally get into.
Exactly. That, probe lenses have been around for a while topside, but Laowa came in and made this probe lens at a nice price point, good performance for a first effort. It was light hungry too. It's an f/14 lens. So, right. But you really had to light up your subject, but the natural history productions just grabbed hold of it and took off with it and started shooting. I mean, whole productions shot about macro subjects, and largely a lot of them shot on that probe lens. So these kind of specialized things are where we like to look for opportunity. Another one we took a chance on some years ago that has paid off was doing housing for the Phantom Flex 4K.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And as you can imagine, in the natural history world, there are things that happen very fast, and being able to not only slow it down, but also have that pre-record capability so that you don't miss it has been a big deal. That's been a very popular thing for natural history as well.
Oh no, I can imagine. Yeah. I mean, that thing shoots like, 1,000 frames a second. Being able to grab that chunk of time and then slow it down to 24. It gives you so much content.
Yeah. And to that point, so many of the cameras out there, one of the things Red did supremely well is they I want to say they became the de facto camera for the natural history market, largely because they made a small package with high performance and specifically resolution and frame rates. Yeah. And it was the frame rates that in particular that the natural history people picked up on, because even just about anything you shoot underwater, even things you think are moving slowly, if you slow it down even just a bit further, just 20%, it gives it a very graceful look and a more appealing look. So, just even a slight bit of slow-mo has really grabbed hold in the natural history market as well. So that's why one of the reasons that Red did exceptionally well in the natural history market.
Oh, no, totally. Yeah, being able to have that resolution and that being able to slow that down and to be able to have that kind of beautiful content that hasn't really been seen that much before. That came in.
Exactly. They were able to shoot things they've never been able to do. And who's a big who really made that all happen as well is Sean Ruggieri, who you've had on your program.
Yeah, Sean's the best. Yeah,
he's great, and he was leading the charge in natural history ever since Red came out with all this stuff. And so, shout out to him for making. Taking what Red produced and getting it into that market so well and so entrenched as it is now.
And that's the thing too, right? Like as a company, you need these kind of champions of your product who are out there working with it every day. You want to be able to give them something that they're proud of.
Absolutely. And, we do have our ambassadors, and Sean is at the top of that list. But every customer we have out there is really an ambassador, and that's kind of the way we look at. We take care of the customer, and they'll take care of us. So everybody out there is an ambassador for us. So we have to be on our toes and make sure that they're happy. No,
totally. John, this has been amazing. It just, I think we take kind of, housings for granted. We kind of just, they're a tool that we have. So to be able to hear, where yours has come from and kind of where you're going, it's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, if you like the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. If you'd like to support with the production of these episodes, you can purchase our very cool merchandise at theunderwaterpodcast.com. We've got branded coffee mugs, stickers, beer cozies, and posters featuring our amazing illustration and logo by Joe Hodino. If you'd like to connect with us or learn more about our guests, you can reach us at theunderwaterpodcast.com or on Instagram. We also have a Facebook group where you can discuss the episodes and even get your questions answered by our guests. There's a link to it in the show notes. Also, don't forget about Waterproof magazine, showcasing the best in underwater art. Read it online or purchase a print edition at waterproofmag.org. You can learn more about my underwater photography workshops and mentoring at brettstanley.com or Brett S Photo on Instagram. The Underwater Podcast is presented and produced by me, Brett Stanley, and our music is Neo by Oh Boy. Keep creating, everyone. I'll see you in the water.